Can you hear me back there? Oh, voila. I hear myself loud and clear. Great. It's wonderful to see you all after what feels like a very long-distance relationship over the past 5 years. And now we're finally getting to know one another in person. It feels great. So, welcome to the first Global Greens Plenary, Stepping Up to the Future. The intention of this session is to be sort of relaxed and start to explore some of the questions that is the focus of this Congress, which is essentially learning about one another, learning about what are the major political issues in each region of the world, learning about what Greens are doing about it, how are we positioning ourselves in relation to these major significant issues, and what are we going to do going forward over the next 5 years between now and the next Congress when we meet again. So this is a milestone moment in time, and I feel very happy and honored to be on Earth together with you. So I feel now is our moment to use our lives to make a positive difference in the world. So it's good that we can do this together. And I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Kelly Yen. I'm the coordinator of the Global Greens. And today we'll be hearing from leaders from each of the 4 federations around the world. So, with that, I will begin with introducing each one of them one by one. And the speakers will be speaking in different languages. First in English, then in Spanish, then in French, then in English again. So if you don't have your headphones, you can get them outside, either one. Feel free to do so. So our first speaker to tell us about politics in the Asia-Pacific region will be Penny Allman-Payne. She's the co-convener of the Asia-Pacific Greens Federation. She is the immediate past co-convener of the Australian Greens. She also does a lot of different things in her life. She's, of course, a political activist across Australia and in her home region in Queensland. And she's spent a year in Manchester doing political activism and legal work as well, because she also serves as a lawyer in both rural and urban areas. And she's a teacher. So she wears many hats and will be able to talk about the issues from different perspectives. So join me together in welcoming Penny to share us a bit about perspectives from the Asia-Pacific region. And I think, where would you like? There? Yeah, okay, we'll sit back at the table.
Thanks, Kelly. And hi, everyone. It's really lovely to be here. I guess one of the things that I love about Congress the most is that convening the Asia-Pacific Greens Federation, we don't get to see each other very often, so we talk to each other a lot over Skype. And Congress provides a fantastic opportunity for us to actually meet face-to-face, and so that's part of what I am enjoying about Congress so far. We actually had a session yesterday in our Asia-Pacific Greens Federation meeting where we reacquainted ourselves with many of the issues that are affecting all of us across our federation. And I think the thing that stands out for me the most is that we are a really diverse federation. We have member countries in Australia and New Zealand where we have strongly developed Greens parties who have been operating for quite a while and are reasonably successful, to countries where we have very small emerging Greens parties, to countries where being a Green is actually puts you in physical danger. So it's a very diverse federation, and yet when we talk about the things that affect us, they're very similar. So if I was to look at the number one issue that comes up regularly for our members, it's actually proportional representation. And that's right across the federation. So we have, member parties in Pakistan where they have a very strong 2-party system, and breaking into that system is very, very difficult. That came up for Australia. Australia has a very strong two-party system, and breaking in to the lower house where we have no proportional representation is difficult. I come from a state that has no upper house at all. We only have one lower house, and it has no proportional representation, and we're the only state in Australia that has no Greens representation. Korea, Nepal, Japan, India, Indonesia, repeatedly the lack of proportional representation and the difficulty that that presents in allowing Green parties to break through is a really big issue for us. Similarly, we have issues in relation to the actual right to form a political party. So in Indonesia, that's a big issue for them. Japan has an issue where the amount of money required to place a deposit to actually run is in the tens of thousands of dollars. So if you're a small emerging Greens party that doesn't have any funds, actually being able to run in the first place presents a major difficulty. So the number one issue, I guess, for the Asia Pacific Greens Federation is proportional representation. Having said that, there's a range of other issues that I think are common to all of us. So gender inequality in political representation and public life is something that resonates across our federation. Economic inequality is another issue that resonates across the federation in both developed and developing countries. Nuclear issues is another issue that resonates for us, particularly for Japan and Korea, where our member parties are fighting the building of new nuclear power plants, through to Australia, where we have the state of Western Australia that's talking about increasing the amount of uranium that's dug out of the ground. Environmental issues, of course, are front and centre in many of the issues that we face across our federation, and it spans a range of issues from water quality. Some of our member countries are facing issues around privatisation of water, forest degradation. We have issues in Korea and Indonesia where there is the building of cement plants and cement mining, which is impacting on them. Coal is a recurring issue across our federation, both in countries like India and Australia in particular. LGBTIQ rights resonate across our federation, as does human rights issues. And in particular, I need to highlight the issues being faced by members in both the Philippines and Indonesia, particularly in relation to the war on drugs and mass killings that are occurring in relation to that particular issue. We also have freedom of expression issues, freedom of religion. So there's a broad range of issues that come up quite often in our federation. Climate change also is obviously right up there in the list, but I think the take-home message from us is that whilst we are a diverse federation, most of the issues that we face are actually quite common, and there's a lot that we can work on together.
Thank you very much, Penny. Yes, journalists and welcome. Thanking Penny. Next, I'd like to invite Fabiano, and he's the co-president of the Federation of Green Parties of the Americas. He's also the executive international secretary for the Brazilian Green Party.
No, the Secretary of International Affairs.
Of International Affairs, and he's also an anthropologist. So over to you, Fabiano.
Bueno, I don't have the translation, and I speak in Spanish.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. My fourth Global Greens conference since Canberra. It's been 16 years, and during which my plans around equality, parity have developed, and also owing to the different crises in my country, the serious political crisis in Brazil and throughout the continent. We know about the situation in the coup in Venezuela, and also political crisis throughout the world. A problem affecting many countries and many green parties faced by many problems, and we have the election of Trump in the United States, the growth of the extreme right in Europe, Brexit. These are all bad news, of course, for the Greens, the worst days to be a Green, but also the best times to actually reinforce our positions as Greens. Well, we have the attacks by the conservative forces, but also efforts at international level to react against these. We are the best response and best placed to fight back. The global Greens are responsible to be something more than an administrative structure. We have to fight against these problems with our environmental stances. When I was 17, when I signed up to the Green Party, I did so because this was a new ideology. The 19th and 20th centuries ideologies changed, and I was in one of the new parties. We have great theorists who inspire us, but we are not so as Cartesian around our policies. So it's not a problem, far from it, in the world that has been destroyed in which we live. We do have to understand a whole range of policies. I don't want to just talk about the Americas, but really open up to discuss the political environmental movement and the European idea of political environmental ideologies and how we absorb that idea, acquiring global legitimacy, because this has been an evolution which has taken thousands of years. When the Europeans arrived in our continents with our Christian ideology, we had already had thousands of years of our indigenous and First Peoples history, stories about our roots and about the collapse of our different societies. The history of the Europeans is based on war, but our are more around from the stories of our original peoples, our first peoples, because of sustainability and respect, but also because of the depletion of natural resources in some of these societies. What makes our ideology different is its heterogeneity. Unlike other ideologies in the 19th century, environmentalism, which has to be really the mainstay of ideologies in this century, owes its strength to creative heterogeneity, which allows us to come up with plural solutions to the problems of modernity that we're being faced with. So this is why we have to develop our history together. History books only talk about the colonizers, so that we cannot say that we're the sons and daughters of one continent. We are faced with a challenge of developing bridges amongst us. There are many differences between the different federations. We have to establish common pathways, and the Europeans cannot be the only ones who decide the way forward as Greens. We have to really forge a path together. The major difficulty that we face today, and we have to move forward, concerns dialogue amongst the federations. I recall that some years ago, when the German Greens supported bombing in Kosovo, in Brazil, we felt totally horrified, and we poured out into the streets to protest. And today, I think we have to overcome that, but I do understand that very often they talk about the politics in our countries, really not bearing in mind what our own parties are saying. And I think this has really been the result of a major communication problem. So we always have to try and establish a dialogue in these cases. So I think it's here that the Greens have to actually bring about a greater communication, a cultural communication, so that we can be a bridge. We have many doubts and questions about the obstacles, but we will be dreaming about a plural, idealistic movement. In the Netherlands, the Greens are the great response to the far right and the pragmatism of the left and the right. The future is green. We are just setting out, but we also have to see that the Himalayas, the Kalahari Desert, and the Urals have to be involved and dealt with also. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Fabiano. It's a really good introduction to the green ideology from the Americas. Next, I'd like to invite our third speaker, Frank Habineza. He is the president of the Democratic Green Party of Rwanda and also president of the African Green Federation, which he also represents as a lead representative on the Global Greens Coordination and Global Greens Executive, as does Fabiano and Evelyne as well. So I'd like to invite Frank to share his perspective from his part of the world.
Okay, thank you very much. We are very pleased to be here. It has been a lot of effort. And as you have heard from the BBC, many African delegates have been denied visa. It's a very big shame. We are, many people are very, and the reasons here, they are not genuine reasons. We thank Caroline Lucas. She has made strong statements that I hope maybe it will change the policy later. Yeah, but anyway, we have a big delegation from Africa. I think you saw most of them yesterday. So, yeah. So the African Federation officially was created in 2010 in Kampala, Uganda, by 23 political parties. But now the Federation has grown to over 30 political parties and political movements. So we are growing, and some of our parties have representation in Parliament, like in Madagascar. Others have been already in the government, Mauritius, Burkina Faso, in Senegal, Mali, Niger, different countries in Egypt. So the movement, the Green Movement, is growing stronger and stronger in Africa. But the challenges we face, they are almost similar. Why? Because even though Africa is very rich in natural resources, those natural resources are also being a cause of a problem. Because everyone from all over the world wants to come and take part or take a share from those resources. So we have a big interest from China now. Also, of course, there has always been an interest from Europe and also from America. But now the coming of China has changed the political terrain. At least the interest from Europe and America always, when they come to Africa, they at least ask the African governments to respect human rights, to respect democracy. The presidents don't want to listen, but there is always some conditions attached. But the Chinese, they don't care. They have big money, they want to invest, they want to give for free, and they don't care whether there's democracy or there's human rights. No, nothing. Actually, when they take even the soil, they come to construct roads, and they even take the soil and the stones, everything they take away to China. So it's a big challenge. Yeah. So we've been seeing, if you go like to Zambia, the big investments, they want to do mining, they mine very badly. They don't care, even the mining policies, if they make those big holes, they don't cover them up, they don't do anything. So it's a very big challenge we have. So one of the biggest challenges, I say, we have natural resources, but the natural resources, instead of being a blessing to us, they have also been part of the problem. And you have seen this in Congo, where natural resources have contributed to the very big war in Congo and loss of millions of lives. We've had about over 8 million people who have been killed in Congo, and the natural resources is part of that problem. So we need to have sustainable natural resource management and to have countries which respect the rules of the game. And as we say, rule of law. Rule of law is a challenge because most of the countries do not respect. They have it in the Constitution. We have in the Constitution separation of powers, but in practice, you find it's not respected. The states, the executive branch, that's the president or the prime minister, overrides everything. The parliament becomes a rubber stamp. They just give them bills and they just put them into laws. They don't discuss, they don't challenge anything. And in some countries where the parliament have some say, they are corrupted. You find the MPs have been given huge amounts of money to write some laws or to change some laws, and you find the head of state inviting all MPs at his state resort and gives them money, please go vote for this, go vote for that. So you find that even the independence of parliament is a challenge, and this even happens in East Africa, at least in my own home area. We see that happening. So you find that we have had problems of leaders who don't want to leave power. They don't want to respect the Constitution. Most of the constitutions, they outline that it's 2-term limits, maybe 5 years or whichever years. But after the end of those limits, a president wakes up and says, my people still want me. And all of a sudden you see people coming on the street that we want you to stay, and it's all, politically engineered. And the constitutions are changed, that political leaders will stay in power, even for life. We have a case like in Zimbabwe, the leader is there until maybe when he breathes his last. Actually, the first lady said recently that even when he's incapable, they will drive him, they will push him on the wheelbarrow to the state house. So basically, he is there to stay forever. So we've had other cases, like in Uganda, where they had to change the constitution, and the president has been there now, I think, the 5th term in office. And yet, this president, when he was taking power, he said that the biggest problem of African leaders is overstaying in power. So we asked this revolutionary man, was the problem we mentioned when you took power, that the problem for Africa's leaders who overstay in power. But after some time, he became part of the same as what he was fighting. And of course, in Rwanda, 2 years ago, the same move came that the president still needed to be present. Our party, the Democratic Union Party of Rwanda, we fought that. We said, no, we have to respect the Constitution, still 2-term limits. Of course, it was not easy for us. We went to Parliament, and no one listened in Parliament. We went to the Supreme Court. We had a case. It was even difficult to find a lawyer because all the lawyers were too scared to take our case against the president. And the case was late because the first time we were there, we had no lawyer, and you can't stand the Supreme Court without a lawyer. So finally, when we had our case, a lawyer, we had the case, and then finally they said no, that the people they want him to stay. So who are you to refuse? So anyway, so now the president has at least more 17 years to stay. But we said as our party that we are not going to accept this. We oppose this, and we are going to put a candidate to oppose these processes to make sure that we have democratic rule, and that candidate will be me in the August elections this year. And I'll surely... I will be really counting on your support because, the last time we wanted to stand in these elections in 2010, it was very bad. I think some of you remember the horrible stories in 2010, even where my deputy president was assassinated. And where I has been forced to leave my country, went through exile in Sweden, where I stayed for 2 years before returning. So we pray that such bad repeat doesn't happen, that we at least move forward. But we really do count on your support in whichever way you can to be on the news, listen, talk to your MPs, talk to your government. Yeah, it helps. It makes a difference because democracy, some of people take it for granted in your countries. But really, for us, it's not really for granted. People are sacrificing their lives for it, yeah. So it's something we all need to be committed to. Other problems we've seen, because of these problems of people don't want to leave power, there have been civil conflicts, wars. Like in Burundi, the move was there. I think you've had a political situation in Burundi where the president, there was this issue of the changing of the constitution, and the people, now the country has about over 100,000 refugees, and they have many people in exile. Others, several thousands have been killed. In Congo, yeah, I think you have also heard about it. You have heard it in Congo Brazzaville, Congo Kinshasa, in Gabon, not Gabon, in Gambia. It was happening when the opposition leader won the elections, the president refused to go. And it required the intervention of all regional states with military to make him go. So basically, it's not really an easy thing, it's a real big challenge. Yeah, we've seen in Egypt, where we were all very happy after the Arab Spring. We were all very, very enthusiastic. We thought that this is a peaceful change. People can stand up and can remove a regime. But you saw how this hope has been overturned in Egypt. We have several thousands of politicians who are in exile. And we have a special case of our friend, Dr. Ayman Noor from Egypt, who has been denied a renewal of his passport. He even took a case to the court, and he won the case that he has no crime in the country, but they cannot allow him to return because his passport is not renewed. Really, these are things that we as Greens should condemn and request the governments to respect at least their laws in place. So you find that several politicians are in exile, they can't go back home, they have no crime, but even those in the country are in prison, and it's not only Egypt, I mean, it's almost everywhere in Africa. It's a challenge which needs to be addressed here. So we as African Greens Federation, we are really following this with special interest, and we are very concerned. We condemn such happenings, because if such things are not addressed, it means that there's no hope. Natural resource exploitation is done in a very bad way, illegally. You find, like in Madagascar, the people in power, they even sell the land, I think, to some other external, like the Chinese or investors, to get money to go to elections. And they do this even illegally. Some endangered species, some special flowers like rose trees and so on, they have all been exploited, and they're very expensive, but they are exploited and sold illegally. And of course, we have other problems of natural disasters, which also come because of improper land management. So we have poor systems management here. So this goes on in Mauritius, but Mauritius, there's a special case whereby I think you heard from the presenter yesterday that the two families are controlling the country for 40 years. Just two families, from this family to another family. So, yes, Mauritius, we call it paradise in Africa, but we see that this paradise is not sustainable because we need a proper system which ensures everybody to participate into the politics. And we find that the descendants of the slaves, they are still treated as third-class citizens. And they are human beings. And it is a problem of reparations. We had cases where Britain, I think, had accepted, and France, but nothing moves. Sometimes it just stops in papers, but nothing moves. To do those reparations, I think something which needs to be taken by the Greens more seriously. Our friends in Mauritius have had to make several hunger strikes to see that they could be recognized, but it's not easy. It's not easy because our voice, if we add it on their voice, it will make a difference, to make a change. And of course, I thank you that last time when we sent our call, most of you reacted, and that helped us to save the life of Silvio, our friend Silvio Michel, who is 76 years old. He was making a hunger strike for 30 days, and was willing to pay his life for this cause, to see that the people are really, human rights is respected in Mauritius. Yeah. So there are several issues. Like we have in Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, where there's waste management problem. Even the capital city, the capital city is stinking. There is no proper systems there in Ivory Coast. Those are some of the issues. And when you look in the West African countries, in Niger, Senegal, Burkina Faso, Mali, despite the problem of terrorism, of course we condemn terrorism with all our strength, but you find that they have this desertification problem, the Sahel issue, and the governments don't have proper political program to manage those problems. And this makes the Green parties in those regions so important, because the Green Party in the West African Sahel region is the only party which can ensure sustainability of the future, which can ensure that people can have food and water. Other political parties, they think about other programs, education and so on, but they don't think about that people need to really have clean water, they need to have food, they need to have a clean environment, a space, because there are no trees. Yeah, so we had a program in Mali where we assisted the ecological party in Mali to plant some trees to deforest one forest which had been overtaken by the people. And of course, the state had not taken care of that. So that was successful. And we also have a green mayor in that area who was elected after that program. And people in that area, they are very environmentally conscious. Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, the state decided to make the whole, how do you call it? The west side, for the whole of the west of the capital in Bamako will be brought to that commune. So it's another big problem. And it's also near a transboundary water, River Niger, which goes to about 5 countries. So it's going to contaminate all those people there. Yeah, we've seen in Chad, a whole lake has dried up. I think you have heard about this case, Lake Chad. It's history now, because of poor environmental management. So I think there are so many issues which are of great concern, but maybe in summary, our biggest problem is about democracy. There's no respect of rule of law, respect of the Constitution. That's the root cause of all other problems. Because if we do respect the Constitution, separation of powers, rule of law, then there will be respect of other political parties, other voices, because the restrictions we have on political parties now and civil societies and the media can be overcome if we respect the principles of democracy. Because when you see political repression is in all the countries, you find that the media, if it's not supporting the government, it has a problem. The civil society, if it's not supporting the government, it has a problem. Political parties, if you are opposition, you have a problem. So even some of us have had to see how we start being a little bit not as we want to be, so that we can survive. I think the Greens from Sweden were saying yesterday they had to compromise a lot to make sure that they can do something. So sometimes we know everything, but you say if you go this far, you will just die. So he said, okay, let's come a little bit in the middle to see that we can survive, do something. Today, maybe we can do more tomorrow. Yeah. So it's a challenge, but we hope that with your support, things will be better. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you. In that short talk, I personally learned a lot. It was very eye-opening. It really makes me feel the enormity of the challenges. But at the same time, you said, the Greens movement is growing. So I think that's a really important reason to hope. And now I'd like to bring us to our fourth speaker, Evelyne Huytebroeck. She is a member of the European Green Party Committee and also a member of the Global Greens Coordination. She's been a member of the Belgian Green Party Ecolo since 1982. She's also served as its co-president and as the Regional Minister for Environment, Energy, Urban Regeneration, Youth, and Aid to Individuals from 2004 to 2014, and again was elected as a regional MP from 1989 to 2002, and again elected in 2014, and is still serving presently as a member of Parliament, as well as a member of local council. Very busy. Over to you, Evelyne.
Thank you very much, Kelly. And because it's also diversity of language, I shall speak in French, my mother language, if you don't mind. Voilà, merci beaucoup.
So, thank you very much and welcome. Welcome to everyone. Welcome to Liverpool. It's been a lot of work with Kelly, with Margaret, with other members of the Federation, with our friends here locally. Organising this Congress has been a lot of work, and I think it's very much on the right tracks. I think it's going to be a big success. I'm going to speak about Europe and the challenges of Europe, how we respond, how we as Greens try to respond to these challenges. I'm not going to talk about the problems of every individual European country, because it seems to me that in this day and age, the most important thing is to look at the European project as a whole. And you need to be aware that today, the European project has kind of broken down. I think that's become quite obvious. Last week, we celebrated the 60th anniversary of the Treaty of Rome, in Rome, the 60th anniversary of the communities. But unfortunately, what we see today is that Europe has big, big problems. Let me mention a few. 2 years ago, we had the Greek crisis. Now, the Greek crisis demonstrated that there was very little solidarity between different European countries. In addition to that, we've had Brexit now. Brexit, which is something that very few people expected here in Europe, and it was a real trauma, and it continues to be so today. And today, of course, is the week when Article 50 was triggered. It was triggered just this very week. Then we have the refugee crisis, and when it comes to the refugee crisis, Europe has not been able to come up with a single answer, an answer based on solidarity, a common response. We also have the rise of populism. Populism, the extreme right, and ethno-nationalism, all of these are on the rise. Whether we're talking about Austria, whether we're talking about the Netherlands, whether we're talking about Belgium, whether we're talking about Hungary or Poland, or I could in fact list a number of other countries. Then we also have terrorism and terrorist attacks. In fact, last week only in London, in this country. And the response has not really been a consistent response on behalf of Europe. It's not been coherent. The responses have been very piecemeal, individual, and there is, unfortunately, fear within the population. And I would also add to that that there's not been a much of an international response either from Europe. And then I would also mention the ecological and climate debate that we're having at the moment. I mean, we're having it, but it's not something that comes up in the big electoral campaigns. If you look at the French electoral campaign for the French presidential elections, the debate on climate, the debate on the environment are simply not there. But fortunately, we have the Greens. We have the Greens. And the Greens can come up with an answer. And in fact, if you look back over the last 2 years, I mean, I've been doing that, and I've been ticking off all the different responses that we've been able to come up with. And I can tell you that the Greens are coming up with an answer, and we have fought some battles and won these battles. I wouldn't like us to be purely pessimistic in this Congress. I really would like us to demonstrate that there are areas where we are able to come up with answers. First of all, and this is for sure, all of our Green parties are pro-European parties. I think that needs to be stated for the record, particularly bearing in mind that there are a lot of question marks hovering over the European project at the moment. So the Greens want a Europe, but not just any old Europe. And that's why within the European Green Party, we've set up a group called the Future of Europe. And in that group, we in fact took that group to Rome last week for the 60th anniversary celebrations of the Treaty of Rome. The Europe that we want is not an inward-looking Europe. We don't want a Europe that is marked by very, very strict security measures, hyper-security. We don't want it to be a Europe just of money. We want it to be a Europe of justice, a social Europe, a Europe premised upon solidarity, just the way it was 60 years ago when the founding fathers created Europe. That's what it was. But over the course of the years, unfortunately, we've lost the very essence of the European project. Now, coming back to Brexit. And if we turn towards our Green friends here in England, you know, they fought a real battle. They had a real campaign for Europe. They were pro-Europe. And the European Green parties, for their part, organised council meeting in Glasgow just a couple of months ago. And in fact, today we're meeting here in Liverpool. We're meeting here, and I think that that in itself is very significant. Then moving on to the climate. Climate is a priority for European Greens at all levels. Yesterday, you may have heard the Swedish minister, Mrs. Lövin, who talked a lot about the climate, because this is a concern for us at all of our levels, wherever we might be active, whether we're a minister in Sweden, whether we are elected members of the European Parliament, or wherever else we might be active, at regional level, at local level. It so happens I am an elected representative at regional and at local level, and I can tell you the green battle will not be won unless we create this link between the local level and the supranational level. And therefore, the way I see it, this fight on the ground, in our cities, in our villages, in our smaller conurbations, in the regions, that battle is extremely important. And we have won some victories in Malmö, in Sweden, in Mallorca yesterday. You may have heard a local councillor from Mallorca talked about that, in Strasbourg or elsewhere. We have elected representatives locally in our local governments, and they're doing some extraordinary work at local level. We also have Greens, of course, in Europe, and this is an important point I'm about to make. Our European Greens are in touch with associations, so NGOs, and citizens' movements, because one of the big problems that Europe is facing today is also anything that has to do with corruption. Corruption, whether we're talking about political corruption or economic corruption. And this holds true for all parts, whether it's Eastern Europe, Western Europe, regardless. The Greens stand up for transparency. We stand up for democracy. We stand up for an opening up towards our citizens, because the citizens feel disenchanted with politics at the moment. We've experienced this very much in Belgium. We have big problems of corruption with some of our parties in Belgium. And citizens are turning away from politics. They're turning their backs on politics. And of course, when they turn their backs, they then start voting for populist parties instead. That's why it's so important for Greens to constantly stay in touch with civic movements, with citizens' assemblies, the kind that we've seen emerging in all of our countries recently. There are countries where Greens recently decided to form alliances for elections, alliances with citizens' parties. Bulgaria, Romania, I visited these countries in the Balkans recently. Our Greens over there, unfortunately, still have to overcome a certain threshold to get representation in the legislative assemblies, in the parliaments, but nevertheless you have these emerging civic movements and we are uniting forces with them. So our objective in Europe, well, we have three important elections coming up. I mean, one, we've just won, if you like, the Netherlands. We were successful because the result in the Netherlands was extraordinary. You'll see the outcome. In fact, Jes Klaver, I think, will be talking about that. He's responsible for Young Greens in the Netherlands. It's a great source of inspiration and hope. Then we've got the French elections coming up, and then in September we've got the German elections coming up. And needless to say, there are other elections in Europe, but these are three countries where we'll be looking very closely at developments to see what's happening to Europe. Now, in the Netherlands, the Greens won, and the Democrats also won against the nationalists. We very much hope that in France, the National Front, the Front National, will not get through. We very much hope so. In Germany, we'll see. They just had regional elections, but I very much hope that our Green friends in Germany, and they are very strong, that they will be able to maintain their weight in the parliament. So what about the European Greens and the global Greens? It seems to me, and this is the reason why in the European Green Party and in the committee of that party, I have chosen to really get involved in the GGC and in the Global Greens, because it seems to me that the only way to achieve solidarity is if we have solidarity outside of Europe as well. Now, we find ourselves in a difficult predicament on the international stage. What's happening with Syria, the arrival of Trump, Putin and Russia. You saw in recent weeks Russia's hesitations, climate policy, the Paris Agreement and what they've got to say about that. Then ecological problems around the world. Fiji, for instance, we have a representative from Fiji, and I'm delighted. I know that the next one after Bonn will be, in fact, be Fiji for COP. We have Africa. We have, I think, a mutual challenge for the years to come. We've already talked about refugees, and I think that environmental refugees, climate refugees, will be a big challenge for the future. I think we underestimate how many refugees we have. I mean, we already don't know quite how many we have today, but it's nothing compared to the environmental or climate refugees that we'll have in the future. Now, I believe in what we do. It's not always easy. It's not always straightforward. We don't always have the same programs, be it around the world or in Europe. Our parties don't necessarily have the same programs. I acknowledge that. But I still think it's important for us to have exchanges of experiences, not just in venues such as the GGC. I think we need to, in addition to that, organise bilateral contacts, bilateral exchanges. They might be face-to-face ones, or they might be via Skype, or they might be local visits, missions. But to have these contacts. In fact, I've been very fortunate. I was able to visit Canada. I saw our Green Canadian friends over there. I also went to Mexico. I went to Guadalajara, and I met with our Mexican Green friends. I was also in Morocco for COP. We met with the Green Moroccans. I went recently to New Zealand. I met our New Zealand Green friends over there. And of course, they all have their own struggles, their own specificities, but notwithstanding that, we managed to rally around genuinely green values, i.e. more solidarity, more justice, more environment, more sustainability. Although, the emphasis we put on each of those might be slightly different from case to case. But these exchanges, nevertheless, are of primary importance. Other meetings at big events, such as COP, of course, this year in Marrakesh, and I very much hope that in Bonn we'll be given an opportunity to meet again. It's an important moment for our priority. Climate, after all, is our priority. And finally, and that will be my concluding remark, I think it's possible for us to share campaigns as well. Campaigns on major subjects. In Europe, we launched a campaign. It's in fact an international campaign on divestment and fossil fuels. I believe you mentioned this this morning, in fact, in the plenary session. And there's going to be another parallel session on climate and on the whole issue of divestment. This movement is a movement that started in the United States of America, but today we have this campaign everywhere, in our municipalities, in our regional parliaments. We've been talking to insurance companies, to pension funds, we've been talking to banks, and citizens are starting to understand what's going on. You need to do a lot of educational work in these campaigns. You need to raise a lot of awareness. If we could do this on a global scale, a green campaign globally on divestment, I think that would be really positive for the future. So thank you very much, and I look forward to our discussions.
Thank you very much, Evelyne. So just to kind of summarize what I heard, some common patterns amongst each region, from Penny pointing out that there's that great diversity amongst the enormous span of the Asia-Pacific region, which covers from the Middle East to North Asia to the Pacific Islands to South Asia, that there is an enormous commonality of struggle. And I heard that reiterated again and again in each person's speech, be it climate change, be it democracy and the rule of law, and holding governments to account, as well as both in Africa and in Europe, the importance of justice and solidarity, and fighting corruption, be it corruption historically from the devastating effect of colonialization to the modern day devastations of the continued resource extraction that we're all part of in one way or another as part of a system, and we heard it very vividly in Frank's experience in Africa. So now in the remaining 15 minutes of this segment of this plenary, I want to give a chance to each of you to kind of ask questions of one another. focusing on, so what can we, as a global community, including everyone here in the audience and listening around the world through the internet, what can we do together to get where we want to go? And I'd like to give the first question opportunity to Penny, because before the session she shared with me some questions that she had on her mind on this topic. There you go.
Thank you. I guess my question to the other federations is, if we were going to link in as federations, what would be your key issue, for example, that you would like to work with the Asia Pacific Federation on? I think I've heard some of them actually in the comments that have already been made, but I think it would be interesting to hear where you see the key linkages could be with our federation.
Bueno, yo creo que la gran...
Well, I think the major issue here that unites us is climate change, because to some extent we're all going to suffer the consequences of it, so we do need to cooperate around that. The Pacific is facing a major problem in that respect. We need to see, well, it's also the case of the Americas and Africa. I think this is the major issue facing the Greens. I think that would be the way forward in terms of dialogue.
Yes. Yeah, well, I do agree with the issue of climate change, that it unites us all, because, I mean, there is enormous environmental degradation in different countries in Africa, that especially to do with deforestation. You see there's also desertification. Look at the whole of North Africa, there's Sahara Desert. And then West Africa, we have Sahel Desert. And then in Southern Africa, we have Kalahari Desert. So, I mean, the whole of Africa, I mean, big part of it is a desert. So the trees have been depleted by previous, our ancestors. And we need to do more work to do more tree planting to see that we can save our continent, but also proper land management systems, avoiding soil erosion, because it's taking a lot of our soil because we don't protect our mountains or our hills properly. Yeah, that's one aspect. Another thing which links us together is this issue I talked about, issues of democracy. Because you look in Africa, I think, well, it was except from South America, but we have been having a lot of military coup d'etats. So now we have changed from military coup d'etats to a new wave of leaders changing the constitution. Now they say it legally, to extending their staying power. It's another coup d'etat also, because your term of office ends, and you say, I want to keep, my people still needs me, the country still needs me, so you still keep on. And what the next phase will be that people maybe have to fight to take off these people. So again, that means that we thought we are going to finish this political violence, but it looks like those presidents who overstay power, if they are not removed democratically, there will be other people who need to remove them forcefully, and that will be another bloodshed. So whether you are green or you are yellow or you are white, this links you together, because when the work starts, it doesn't look at the color of your skin or color of your blood or your ethnicity or what, because war is war, it takes anyone. So you find that if we don't respect democratic values, democratic principles, we have no sustainable peace in Africa. So this, whatever the case, links us together. That's what I can say.
Yes, I think that at the moment when we have on one side Trump and the other side Putin on those questions of climate change, who are really more and more climato-sceptic, we would be crazy if the Greens are not making a campaign on the climate change. Of course, it's the moment, it's a kind of opportunity for us to be very strong on those questions. And we will have the COP23 2 years after the COP21. That's logical. But it's an important moment, because it's the moment where we will begin some practical measures. And also that we will concretize, yes, this Paris Agreement. So because of these two reasons, it's of course the climate change who must be the priority. But always when I say climate change, and you know I was Minister of Environment and Climate during 10 years, and I always said that climate change, it's really very linked, must be very linked with the question of democracy and of the question of more justice and more solidarity. So always link climate change, environment, energy with social questions.
Great. In the last 10 minutes of this Q&A, are there any other questions that you have for one another? Frank?
Yeah, well, my question is, we as a green family, what can we do to support each other to overcome these problems?
Can I respond, Kelly, first? Go ahead. I guess in answering that question, it might be useful to briefly talk about some of the things we're doing in the Asia-Pacific Federation to improve the way we work in the Federation, which I think can actually be translated more broadly to how we work in the Global Greens. So Evelyne talked about, for example, ways that we connect in visiting other countries, etc. So in the Asia-Pacific Greens Federation, we're very fortunate in that the Australian federal government has a developing democracy program which they provide grants to major political parties to do work in that space. The reality is that the two larger parties in our country use that as a slush fund to go on tours around the world, but the Greens parties actually use it very specifically for developing democracy in other countries. So through the Asia-Pacific Greens Federation, we have project teams that work together on projects to help improve democracy and develop the capacity of Greens parties in our region. And we do a number of things in that space. So we had a delegation that went to the Solomon Islands recently for their first Congress to talk with them about ways to actually build their political party, how to have a transparent organisation and ways to improve governance within internal governance, and also ways that they can then extend their outreach into the community. We had a study tour around our last federal election in Australia where we actually invited representatives from all of the Greens parties who are members of the Asia-Pacific Greens Federation, and they did a number of things which included spending time with MPs and talking to them about the way that they engage with their communities, talking to states parties, because we have Federation of State Parties in Australia, and how they operate in terms of their governance and the way they're structured, to then providing space for those delegates to actually link and network amongst one another so that they could recognise the commonalities across the Federation and how they can leverage off that. Requests that we get in terms of surveying our members from our Federation and how we can improve what we do going forward include things like working collaboratively on key policy areas and actually creating collateral that parties, emerging parties in countries where they are less resourced than some of the others, can actually translate them into a local context so that things that they can't produce themselves on their own, we can leverage the capacity that we have across the Federation to improve the way we do that. We also have mentoring program and internships where we actually had people from the study tour who stayed on in Australia and actually worked in Greens parties offices to see how they operated and to see what skills they could take back. We're looking at developing a webinar program going forward in 3 areas. Members of our Federation want assistance with internal governance, writing policy and actually developing campaigns. And I guess the way that I see that translating across the Federation is I think we can do similar things across the Global Greens. So I've heard from Fabio and Frank and Evelyne that there are things that we need to do together, and I think we need to look at not just the outward political stuff. So, you know, as an MP, Evelyne has an opportunity to travel around and meet Greens in other countries. But I also think, I guess from my perspective as someone who's not an elected MP, but does the bulk of my work in terms of the governance and the way that we campaign and sitting on campaign committees and those sorts of things, I think we need to look at ways that we can build the capacity of the people who actually do the backroom work as well, I guess, in the parties. Not those front-facing elected MPs, but the people who sit on the committees, the volunteers who take on the office bearer roles, and look at how we develop their capacity, because that's what actually helps grow stronger Greens parties around the world, so that we can then more collectively leverage off each other and improve what we do, because I think we need to think of both of those things. So I think, Frank, particularly what I heard from you is you know, it's really challenging in your federation, like it is for many of us in the APGF, just to even get the Greens parties off the ground and to help them grow and to develop the governance so that they can actually be stronger. The other thing that I think we need to do is remember that everybody's context is different. So one of the things that I was talking with our Secretary, Claire, with earlier this morning was that as an Australian Green and a New Zealand Green, we're used to the situation where our Greens parties get very little mainstream media coverage. You know, we need to look at ways that we can subvert the mainstream media and how do we get our message out there. And in our countries, it's about face-to-face campaigning and leveraging social media to bypass the mainstream. But we forget that if we have an MP that's visiting one of our other member countries in our federation, that whilst we don't actually think it would be a big thing for one of our MPs to visit their Greens parties, in their country, that's a major thing. And it actually gets them significant media coverage, and it helps them increase the legitimacy of their own emerging Green party within their country. So I think across the Federation, we need to be conscious of the fact that we have so many different contexts, and there are many different ways in which we can actually assist each other. And so by opening the dialogue and actually really talking across the federations, and I think comments that Evelyne made about increasing, you know, the use of Skype, as the APGF co-convener, I should probably get on Skype more often with representatives from the other federations, not just through the Global Greens Coordination Group. And I think if we improve that dialogue and we actually develop a real understanding of our different contexts and the way that we're operating and the challenges that we face, I think that we can start to leverage much more of the incredible capacity that we have if we work together.
Yeah. That was a beautiful summary. Thank you so much. And just to conclude, I wanted to give anyone one last minute if you want to make a final word. And while you're thinking about that, I'll invite the next segment to prepare themselves. That would be Margaret and Johan, who will explain to us a bit about the practical measures that we're taking through our resolutions at this Congress. So they're going to give a little instruction about the resolution procedure. So I see Johan is over there and Margaret is there. There are steps in the middle of the stage. So as you ready yourselves, is there any of you willing to say a last sentence?
Last sentence, I don't know, but 2 points that I want to underline. First, we didn't speak, and they are very active about the young federation. We have a young federation in Europe. I think that there are some young federation in the other part of the world. I think it's very important because they are very active, very enthusiastic. They are on the field. They are going. They are sometimes more push than we in our party. So I think that's very important that we continue with this young Green Federation. And second, I was speaking and I want about the local councillor. I insist on this. We made a network of local councillors in Europe. I think that we can make a global green network with the local councillor. I hear that you have a mayor now in Africa also. We have in America, we have also vice mayor and it's important because those people, sometimes they don't come here because they don't have time. They are alone in their city. They don't have the energy to come. They have too much to do. And so we have to find the place, time to make this exchange of experience, to dialogue, to show the initiative, but also the problems that they meet in their own city. So 2 things, the young and the local councillor.
Excellent, very strong.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. Also, thank to Penny for answering the question. I think it's right that we within the federations should also increase our partnership here. But maybe something important I should say is that the African Federation is growing, as I mentioned, but we also have had partners who have helped us to grow. And I would like to mention and thank Green Forum Sweden. The Green Forum Sweden is a foundation of the Green Party of Sweden. They have been with us in this journey for even before we officially established. I think, or for me, I joined in 2008 before the Global Greens Congress in Brazil. They have been accompanying us in this whole difficult journey, establishing the Congress, setting up a secretariat in Burkina Faso where we are officially registered. And now we also have new partners. We have Groen, the Groen Party, it's the Greens, it's the Flemish, Greens from Belgium, who have committed with 3 years program to support the West African Greens Federation, because we have regional federations in Africa. So we have the Continental Federation, but we have 5 other regions where we have semi-autonomous, like West Africa, Eastern Africa, Central Africa, the Southern Africa, and the Northern Africa. So the Belgian Flemish Greens have supporting now the West Africa. And then we have the English Greens, the Green Party of England and Wales, with their partner, the Westminster Foundation for Democracy. It's like a fund which the Green Party has access to, which now is supporting the East African Greens Federation. So we have a partnership also for 3 years, and we are very grateful. So we have started, and they have also both the Groen and the Green UK, they have supported even delegates to come to this Congress. And of course, we have another even session in Wales next week. And then we are also working on another relationship with the Netherlands, the Den Haring from Netherlands. They have also supported about 3 or 4 delegates to come here. So I think these partnerships are very important, and we look forward to have more partnerships because now Green Forum is having 3 regions alone, the North Africa, the Central Africa, and the Southern Africa. So if we could have other partners for each region, that would make us grow stronger and have more activities, even more impact on the ground, because we believed that if we in the regions get more organized, we can support each other more. Because we have language barriers in Africa. Like the West, they speak only French. In the East, we speak only English. In the South, they have Portuguese, they have Spanish, they have English, and French. Because they, like Madagascar and Mauritius, Madagascar is French, South Africa, English, Mozambique, Portuguese, Angola is, I think, Spanish. So you find that it's so difficult for us to communicate, but if they are alone, like in their own region, they can communicate and can support each other. So basically, these regional groupings are something which you can also borrow from us, because also Asia Pacific is another bigger region. So it's something could be a learning experience, and we are proving that it's working. Of course, it's not easy, but we are moving forward. And so we are very grateful also to the Global Greens. I mean, we have had the wonderful Margaret Breakers. I mean, she's been, I don't know where she is. She's been so great to us, supportive from the whole process. And of course, Kerry, our coordinator, yeah. We know that. So another thing, maybe before I stop, because now I kind of have the heart of being in the Global Greens coordination. The Global Greens also needs your support, because we have a secretariat which has only one person, Kelly, to manage the whole world. It's very difficult, you can imagine, yeah. So we need your support to see that we can strengthen our secretariat in Brussels, we have more staff, and we can be more vigilant and attend all those UN meetings and so on. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, Frank. Yeah. No? Okay, and did you want to make a last point, Penny?
I guess I just wanted to support what Frank said, because I think, we've spent some time over the last year and a half capacity building in the Asia Pacific Greens Federation, and we've really found the value in directing our funding through that democracy program into the APGF, and then allowing the APGF to actually do the work in our region has really made a difference. And I think if there's one thing that we need to do coming away from this Congress is to have a really strong commitment to the Global Greens and actually growing the Secretariat, because we're all talking about the fact that we need to communicate more and facilitate that communication. But that actually doesn't happen unless you resource the organisation. So I think Frank's comments about making sure that we actually properly resource the Global Greens is really crucial.
Thank you again for ending on a perfect note. So let's give all the speakers a round of applause to thank them for being who they are in the world. And in the last 15 minutes, I'd like to invite Johan Hamels and Margaret Blakers to speak to us a bit about the future of the Global Greens resolution and what the procedure is for emergency resolutions and the amendments, which will be unfolding over the next few days of this Congress. Would you like to say? Okay. 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 I would say you can stay.
Use this one?
Yes, go right ahead.
Take one? No, take one. Take one in your hand.
I haven't got enough hands. You don't have enough hands?
Okay. No, ça va. Merci. So, wow. First of all, with the resolutions committee, we would like to thank all the delegates who have proposed resolutions, those who have proposed amendments already. That means they read the original resolutions and took their time. And I would suggest that all of you, if you go to globalgreens.org and you go to the link to the resolutions website, you can find everything is posted there. You can look, read, and make up your mind, because on Sunday we will vote. That's the first thing. The second thing, we have two different types of resolutions.
We have the resolutions which will be discussed on Sunday, and we have the rest of the resolutions which you can read on the wall. That's in the entrance. Kaylee will propose them for you there. Yep. And you
on the ground floor.
On the ground floor, and you can support this with your signature.
For the resolutions that we will vote on Sunday, there are two groups. One are the normal ones. They are already on the website. The second group are the emergency resolutions, which will be proposed by you up to this evening, and they will be up on the website tomorrow. Then you can read them. For today, we have two important times for you.
So we have a session where you can discuss the resolutions and the amendments. This is at 4:30 at room 4B. We would invite all the groups who have handed in the resolutions and amendments to be there to discuss, and all the other ones who are interested. And at the evening at 8 o'clock.
That's the deadline?
The deadline, until 8 o'clock you can hand in emergency resolutions.
And you do that through the website. That's the most easy one, because then Kelly has immediately your resolution in text, in the proper form, to be able to publish them on the website and making it available for the other delegates. You can also send it by email to resolutions2017@gmail.com. Then it goes to all the members of the resolutions committee, and we don't have to wait until Kelly can tell us what was posted through the website. That helps us to get fast in place and work hard to deliver you everything before tomorrow. Tomorrow, there is another deadline, because by 8 o'clock Saturday evening, you are able to propose amendments on the resolution committee, on the emergency resolutions. At this moment, on the website, we have 13 resolutions already posted, and we have been receiving already 2 emergency resolutions. They're not posted yet, because we would like to post it together with the other ones that you are still able to propose during the session today. So that's our information at this moment. If you have questions, you can knock on our shoulders, from Alex and from me. We are always open and to discuss with you. Important, I would like to repeat, the people who proposed amendments, please come to the room 4B at 4:30 this afternoon. And also the people who proposed resolutions, please be there and come with us. There is one resolution I would like to ask your attention for, which is the first one. the future of the Global Greens. This was a resolution that was prepared by the Global Greens Coordination. And I think you will talk about that too, or not?
Yes.
Then that's good. Then you get the floor.
Thank you. Okay, thanks Johan and Alex and everybody. So the resolution on the future of the Global Greens has been going through innumerable versions and discussions over the last year or more. So what you see now as the proposed text is something that has been agreed by the Global Greens Coordination, that means the federations, but the actual decision makers in this circumstance at the Congress is not the federations but the member parties, so that's you. And that is the decision that you will be asked to make on Sunday morning, is to have a look at this resolution about the future of the Global Greens and the comments that we've just been hearing from this last panel, plus what we heard yesterday, really, I think, add up to a very strong case for the Global Greens to be continue to exist, but continue to exist in a stronger, better resourced and more robust fashion that's got a greater capacity. And that's what this resolution is committing to. It doesn't have the detail about how that's to happen, so that's a test which we will need to meet. But at least the intention is there, and that's what it's expressing. Yes, I have got. Thank you. I think the content of the resolution is fairly straightforward. Sorry, can you take that too, the pen? Yeah. Sure. The content is fairly straightforward, and so the key sections obviously are the joint action, which is that we commit to working together as priorities on the issues of tackling climate change and strengthening democracy. And I think that's very much what we heard from the discussion that we've just had. Funding. So we agree that an adequately staffed Global Greens Secretariat is essential to provide professional and effective support to the Global Greens and to commit to strengthening its financing and resources over and above current levels. The next section is about the appointment of a convener or perhaps co-conveners. So for the first time there will be a change because I'm stepping down in the middle of this year. So the process of selecting the new convener or co-conveners is in the hands of the Global Greens Coordination, and they will make that decision. But the pool of applicants is to be drawn from up to 2 nominees by each federation, a man and a woman, plus anybody on the current Global Greens Coordination who would like to put their names forward. So that process is happening at the moment with the federations having those discussions. We've agreed that the Global Greens Coordination should continue with its current structure, but we should encourage federations to put forward at least 50% women as their representatives. And finally, that we would invite the Asia Pacific Greens Federation to host the 5th Global Greens Congress in 2022 or before, in a location that might be jointly agreed between the two bodies. So happy to take any questions, but I would really encourage you to talk to your federations about that resolution and make sure that you're coming along ready to ask any questions, but to make that decision on Sunday morning. Thank you.
And about Sunday morning, we love Sunday mornings because we ask you to wake up after a full night of lots of partying together, but at 9 o'clock we're gonna start. Yeah? So it's just a good way to fresh up, and so 9 o'clock Sunday morning, it's gonna be great fun here in this room, I suppose. Yeah? It's in this room, or? Yeah, in this room. For going through the resolutions, we will start the first hour with the resolution on the future of the Global Greens. We hope, as a resolution committee, that it becomes a feast, that everybody can come up here, that lots of party delegates will come up and say why they want the Global Greens to grow and take the next step in their structure and in the way how we work. So that will be, we took the first hour for that, and after that we start with the rest of the resolutions and amendments, and we'll go through in a as fun way as possible through the whole work of getting to final decisions together with you. Okay?
No.
I think that's from our part.
I've got one more thing to say, which is, yes, Ava, I'm seeing you, but I'll say one thing before that. I've got two things to say. The first one is that the three hosts of this Congress, that is the Green Party of England and Wales, the European Greens and the Global Greens, have been working on a joint declaration, which we're planning to publish on Sunday. So I'm just alerting you to that. Unfortunately, it's 4 pages long, which is slightly longer than we wanted, but nevertheless, it's a statement of our joint commitment to the kinds of issues that have been discussed here today and that are being discussed through the weekend. And the second thing is, I see that Ava has managed to overpower whoever's in charge of the AV and put onto the screen our crowdfunder. So if you are in a position to make a donation to the Global Greens, and particularly to bringing this Congress together, and even more particularly to the live streaming and the interpretation, which have been fantastic, please go to that website, click on the button and make a donation. And I think that's it.
That's it for us.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you for that very useful explanation, and that concludes our session. Enjoy your tea break now.
Okay, this one.